Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our penultimate session this week. Great to have you all here. And here today, it's all about coaching. I hope very much that the sun is shining where you are. The sun is shining where I am, which means I therefore have to shut the curtains and shut it out. Otherwise, on camera, I just look like a silhouette, and as if I'm giving evidence, and I'm being hidden, and voice spoken by an actor or something like that. But anyway, so the sun is shining, and I'm very much looking forward to things starting to get back to normal. I'm having my hair cut tomorrow, and I'm got my jab on Saturday, so things are starting to look up. So look, for those of you who have not joined a previous session, this is our fourth session, and welcome to Essex Leadership Week. My name is Tim McEwen, and I'm the Managing Director of Essex Leadership. We've had a great week so far. We've had sessions talking all about leadership. Rod Yap talking about the balanced leader. We had a session yesterday talking all about assessment, benefits assessment, how assessment can work, particularly in the context of selection. And we also had a session at the beginning of the week just introducing Essex Leadership. Before I introduce today, just to say tomorrow, so you're all aware, we've got a really great session with two individuals who I'm in conversation with. Kim Matalon, former Global Head of Leadership, Learning, Talent and Culture at Barclays International. And she's going to be joined by Paul Nansen, Major General Paul Nansen, former Director, Army Leadership and Commandant of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. And we're going to be in conversation, the three of us, talking about leadership in crisis and perhaps what we've seen in terms of leadership over the last 12, 15 months and what this might mean for people going forward. However, today I am delighted to be joined by Holly Sedlacek, who is Head of Coaching at Janus Henderson, and also by Richard Wilmot, who is our very own Head of Coaching. So great to have you both with us. And I'm going to allow Richard and Holly a moment to introduce themselves in a minute. The style of this chat is going to be very much a chat. So I'm going to sort of facilitate a conversation between Richard and Holly all around coaching. So therefore, because it's much more of a conversation, feel free to ask any questions as we go through. Feel free to, if you feel you would like to put your hand up and not butt in, then please feel free to do so as well. Or indeed put any questions that you might have in the chat. And at certain points, I might throw it open to everybody and just ask for your thoughts and your ideas as we go through, to try to make it as inclusive and involving as possible. So feel free to get involved. In the meantime, I see lots of you're on mute, which is terrific. Thanks very much indeed. But obviously, feel free to come off mute if you want to ask a question. That does help. So great. Let's get going. Holly, Richard, really great to see you. We're going to be talking about coaching broadly, but we're also going to be talking about coaching through the career life cycle, and we're going to be touching a little bit on what people have seen, and Holly in particular from your side, from the client side, if you like, what you've seen of coaching during COVID, what sort of requests have been like, and indeed what it might be coming back out of COVID. And we'll pick those points up towards the back end of it. But maybe I should just give you both an opportunity to say hi and introduce yourself. What is it you do, and perhaps how you got into coaching a little bit. Holly, maybe I start off with you, if that's all right?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. It's I really appreciate it. Coaching is such a topic kind of near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad to be sharing this space with everybody today. So I work at Janus Henderson. Part of my role is not only coaching people, but finding coaches for people internally, whether that's executives, et cetera. I was thinking about this question about how and did I get into coaching, and I've been coaching in one form or another since I was probably 17 years old, whether that was children's athletics to now in the corporate space, working with managers, working with individuals, and just helping them live their own values, set goals. And a lot of times it's those goals that are harder to get at, that aren't smart. It's not as easy to measurable. A lot of the stuff that we're coaching around, it's a lot of internal movement. So I just find coaching really impactful, especially right now when we're all kind of living in unprecedented times. So yeah, really happy to be here, and thanks, Tim, for inviting me along.
Great, thank you, Holly, so much, and great to have you. Thanks for coming. Richard, what about you?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So, well, as Tim's already mentioned, I'm head of coaching at Sheffield Haworth, and I've been in the role now since the start of the year. And I'm very much enjoying working with the team to effectively build our capability to deliver coaching services to clients of the search practice, so existing clients, but also to broaden out and to serve beyond that community. My background is in financial services. So prior to this coaching phase of my career, I was originally at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was there for 5 years, and then I moved to Newton Investment Management, ultimately taking the role of head of UK equities there. So I had a 20-year innings, as it were, in the financial services industry. And I left there in 2014, and I didn't have a position to move into at that stage. So I kind of, it felt a little bit like oranges at half time. I had a young family. My family were very young at that point. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to spend with them and to maybe go on some of those holidays that I didn't quite have enough allowance for in the annual quota, and also start to feed and nurture a curiosity and an interest in coaching. And for me, this is something that had been seeded a long time before. When I studied some psychology when I was much younger. I'd always been very keen in investor psychology and market psychology as an investor. So I was very keen on the way markets behave in aggregate, and also how individual investors behave in terms of some of the biases and some of the behavioral factors that can come into play. So I had this very keen interest. I also had an awareness that whilst in that 20-year career, I felt like I'd been trained brilliantly in the technical competencies of the role. So whether that be as an accountant, going through sort of professional training qualifications practice, whether that be as an investor. But I noticed both in myself and also in the people around me that there were some gaps in perhaps some of the other necessary skills of being successful in the workplace. And we can come to talk on about those later. So I was really keen to I suppose fill in and understand a little bit more about leadership and influence and delegation and some of the things that I kind of bumped into, having gone from being, I guess, a very good manager of money to perhaps a not so good manager of people, as can often happen in the financial services industry. So I embarked upon a sort of program of, well, initially it wasn't a program. Originally it was just a sort of a little bit of a toe in the water, plant some seeds for maybe some coaching further down the track after I'd gone back in for a second innings. But before too long, I'd got the bug and I'd completely changed track. And there was this wonderful moment I can remember where I knew that I'd let go of the career that had been before and was now sort of moving into a new one, into the future. And from there, initially with my own practice, but now more recently with Sheffield Haworth, it's been fantastic to be involved and to work with Tim and the team. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, Richard, it is as always brilliant to have you, and I think we'll have a good conversation with you and Holly. So look, let's first of all, I think we probably need to create a bit of a level set here, okay? Because I suspect there are lots of people with different views of coaching, perhaps different personal experiences of coaching. There are lots of different ways, perhaps, of defining it. Maybe some people see it as a remedial activity only, and therefore it's a bad thing to be coached. Some people may see it as a trapping of seniority, and when you become, it becomes one of the sort of the bits of bling that you get when you become into a senior role. You get a coach, but maybe we just sort of level set. So what are your definitions, Holly? How would you position just coaching in general?
Yeah, so I think coaching is moving towards a goal, and I think the more that you coach people, you realize you're coaching them to understand their values and how those relate to that goal. So a lot of times, like you said, if it's for remedial purposes, it might be because this person needs to discover that their values maybe don't tie in with an organization. But for me, a lot of it, that confidentiality that comes with it, it's because you are doing it for this person, for their needs. So coaching to me is something that's very personalized, and it's just for this person's needs in that kind of time and where they are in their career. So you're right, it might be the bling, it might be remedial, but a lot of the time it's a person who's moving in their career and they're expanding somehow, and they just need help cutting through complexity. They need to get time back, and they need to understand how to do that with where they are in their life. So coaching is moving towards a goal, but moving at their pace, I think, is really important too.
Okay, that's cool. Something about making sure you're at their pace, and maybe there's something also in there about because there could well be a three-way relationship here. There could be, the coach, the coachee, and the organization. The organization may have a drumbeat that they wish the coaching to march at. But Richard,
Yeah.
maybe I come to you with the same question.
Yeah.
How would you position it?
Well, I pick up where Holly's started here, and at its simplest level, coaching is partnering with somebody to help them achieve their goals. At its essence, it's an incredibly simple thing, but I think you're right as well. There's quite a lot of confusion and complexity around actually what coaching is, and I think there are a couple of main reasons for that. I think one is we all intuitively have a sense of what coaching is, because pretty much everybody has been coached at some stage in their life, whether that be a sports coach or whether that be maybe a sort of an internal organizational kind of sort of mentoring, or working with some people in the office in an informal basis. So I think there's almost a pre-existing notion of what coaching is, and then there's professional executive coaching, which is a slightly different thing, which is something that in the same way accountancy or investing is a professional service, coaching in itself is a professional service that requires training and requires practice and completion of sort of almost competency hurdles too. So I think the industry collectively is getting a lot better now actually at defining what professional coaching is and looks like. So I think there's a clearer sense of coaching as by professionals as differentiated perhaps from sort of amateur coaching or indeed sports coaching, which of course is very can be of a very high quality, but is adjacent, but quite not the same thing. I think the other area where perhaps confusion comes in is just around the complexity of the different types of coaches and the different types of subject matters they coach. So you spoke about is coaching is it remedial? Or sometimes yes, it can be. Is coaching about mental health? Well, yes, sometimes it can be. It can be a lot of different things. So I think back to my old profession around being a portfolio manager, and so if on the one hand, what's my simple objective? Well, it's to invest clients' money to generate a return within their risk parameters. But then the questions become, well, what asset class? Are you equity, or are you debt, or are you actually multi-asset? And then well, what's the source of your capital? Is it a pension fund, or is it a retail investor, or what have you? And then it's, well, are you long only, or are you long short? Do you hedge? And then you could come on to, okay, well, actually, what are your risk parameters? Well, how much risk do you take? And what's your style? Are you a growth, or are you a value? So we have, something like as simple as a portfolio manager, we have all of these subsets of role almost, and the same is true of executive coaching. Who people coach, how they coach, what coaching topics they coach. It's a myriad, and people generally will specialize in some fashion or another as portfolio managers do. So in answer to your question, I think it's a lot of these things. Coaching, as I said, can be remedial. It can be skills coaching, where perhaps there's a gap between what's required of a role and what an individual can currently deliver. It can be coaching, I guess, a little bit more the gaps between things, how to influence, how to lead, how to communicate, how to delegate, so some of those types of things. And it can also be quite it can be about, and this touches in with what Holly was saying about values, it can be about identity. It can be about, who we are as a person. What do we believe, who we are, why do we, why are we doing what it is we're doing? So it can become a much more sort of profound and fundamental experience as well. So on the one hand, incredibly simple, but also it can open up into quite a lot of complexity as well. And coaching is all of the things that you mentioned.
But a real pleasure, I imagine, managing to coach people when they have these light bulb moments. We talk about values and sort of a bit of a journey of self-discovery. It must be such a privilege and pleasure to watch these light bulbs come on in people's heads. Holly.
Oh, 100%. I think anybody who has seen people stepping up into like not necessarily board level, but when you start getting invited to those meetings, I had somebody a while ago, they kept on going, oh, I get so nervous. I don't know what questions to ask. And I was like, what about your opinion? And they didn't even consider that their opinion mattered, that they were just there to ask questions. And when you see somebody finally go, oh, I get it. I'm here for my opinion too. So you do see those in real time. And all of a sudden this person goes, oh, I'm here for a different reason than I thought. And you see them settle in and get comfortable in that role. And I mean, you're basically seeing somebody's confidence grow right in front of your eyes. And it feels great. But even better than that, that they've just made a shift and they're able to kind of step up in the way that they've probably been asked to do for a long time, but just didn't know how, and they didn't have that connection. So yeah, it's being able to ask those questions or pointing out their patterns that have been holding them back. And it's a huge privilege to see that.
Yeah, good. And Richard, you often talk about, coaching through the career life cycle and because clearly there's different points in different people's careers and what have you. What is it that you're talking about there? Because I imagine it's different things at different points. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. So as we look at it in I guess a couple of different ways. We look at what we maybe consider to be the the more senior sort of areas of coaching, and that might be onboarding, succession, sort of C-suite or exco coaching, and then transition. So that's a kind of a sort of an arc. And then we also look at what we've been speaking of when we're describing it as sort of the democratization of coaching. So this is coaching at much more junior levels within an organization, new leaders, so maybe someone in their first leadership position, or indeed future leaders, trying to help people get on a bearing that enables them to change the trajectory of their career development. And what all of those, I guess, have in common, and there are some differences as well, but what they all have in common is there's a degree of change. And that could be either change in the environment in which the individual's working in. So for example, when you come into a new organization for onboarding coaching, it might be that it's a stretch appointment. And so therefore there might be some skills that are required of you in this new role that aren't present. And so therefore you can work with a coach at that level to enable you to acquire those skills. And this, I guess, is important to differentiate between a coach and a mentor. Is a mentor would previously have performed that role, and there would be some specific knowledge transfer to the individual in the new role. But as a coach, you perhaps wouldn't be expected to understand exactly what these new competencies are, but how to enable the individual to develop for themselves how to accomplish it. So it could be on the skills level. We've touched a little bit around things like influencing and some of the ways how we can get things done and be effective and productive in an organization. And so that's a really important thing when people on board, because they might have been highly functional in an environment that they understood. They knew how things worked, they knew who to go to, they had a network, they had a whole variety of ways of being effective. So recreating that when they arrive in an organization is very important, and that ability to accelerate time to effectiveness and the onboarding process can be essential in terms of the overall success of that individual's appointment, especially with senior lateral hires particularly. That's where we see quite high failure rates. And then the final bit, again, sort of linking with Holly's point around values, is often when you move into an organization, you get to experience the culture really for the first time, because a lot of the conversations, everyone's on show, whether you're the candidate or whether you're the employer in some fashion or t'other. So it's that moment where the values, are they aligning, and where they're not, why are they not, and is that something we can do something about, something we can accept, or is it a non-negotiable? So there are all these different, whenever there's this type of external change in that sense, then there's a place for coaching. And then similarly, these roles often call something from us that's different, a little bit to Holly's point, which is when we need to maybe offer something of ourselves or in a different way to that we have previously for us to be successful in the role at hand. So lots of opportunities for coaching to play a part across those different stages of a career.
Yeah, and Holly, we hadn't really touched on this before, actually, but and what do you do on a practical level when you're bringing sort of senior individuals on board into Janus Henderson? I mean, to what extent do you give them coaching support?
Yeah, and I think that's really individual. Me being totally pro coaching, I've also met a lot of people who only, and this might even be more American. I know everybody can probably hear that I'm American, but I don't know whether it's the culture of my organization or in America, people look at coaches more of that remedial, something is, wrong with me. And I found that perhaps in the UK, a lot of the people that we hire in usually already had one. And so then it's just, for me, it's a great chance to actually just have another person to talk to who's a coach and getting to know them. And I mean, coaches like talking to coaches. So, what techniques do you use, et cetera. So I would say at where I work right now, Janus Henderson, a lot of it is people actually bring them with them, which is great because there's that known, there's a psychological safety there, they've had success together. But if anything else, then, organizations such as yourself, we can go to and be, hey, we have this, wonderful executive and they need help. How can we find, who supports them?
Yeah, good stuff. Good. And I just want to quickly go to a question that's popped in, which is, can everyone benefit from a coach, even those who aren't first-time leaders, maybe just part of a team? I mean, what's our take on that? Holly, where would you go on that one?
Sure. I think the first thing is that initial conversation, asking them like, what's your objective? What do you want to get out of this? And I've certainly had situations, whether it's leading a career session and then you have this automated coaching follow-up and people are kind of like, I'm good. I don't, and you can ask them questions, but it's also the willingness to engage and also my ability to make people feel comfortable, have that, psychological safety to open up about what's going on. So I think everybody can benefit from coaching, but there also has to be that willingness to actually participate in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, what about you? And perhaps also touching on that other question around what is a coach? Is a coach more valuable than a mentor? I mean, how does that play out?
Yeah. So what I can offer on the first one, so question, can everyone benefit from a coach? I think yes. I think this is what we're trying to tap into a little bit more with the coaching of future leaders or indeed new leaders. So I guess this address, everyone in an organization is a potential future leader, because they will, even if you just end up leading a small team, there's a position of leadership inherent in that. So and even if it's self-leadership, in fact, even just on an individual basis. But yeah, so I think there is benefit from coaching for all. The second point around coach, when is a coach more valuable than a mentor? I think that's a really good question, actually. And I think it, so I've got a couple of answers to it. The first is, part of what a mentor is bringing is subject matter expertise of the situation, the environment that the mentee is in. So there's this expectation of a handover of some kind of knowledge and insight and experience. that, if you describe that as pure mentoring. Pure coaching, on the other hand, is, especially from an accredited perspective, is where there's no expectation of subject matter expertise. The coach is actually an expert in the process of coaching, so of enabling the individual to accomplish their objectives. And so so how would I answer that question? So I think, when is a coach much more valuable? I think a coach is more valuable when the scope of the brief is broader than just perhaps a technical competency. I think a coach is more valuable when there's scope for maybe more personal change for the individual. And what we often talk about, because here's the thing, I've got 20 years of financial service experience in background, and I'm a coach. So when I'm working with people, that first-hand experience enables me to connect and understand, and kind of, I've sat in the seat, so there's a relatively easy ability to relate to people. So therefore, as a coach, I've got that in my back pocket. I won't lead with it, but if asked, I might drop it in. So what you'll find is I'll offer it up as an idea that can be either rejected or accepted, rather than it being delivered as advice. So there's scope for coaches to actually travel a little bit on between mentoring and coaching, depending on the match of their own personal experience. But that's a little, describes the landscape a little bit.
Sure, no, that's really helpful, and Rita, thanks for popping a question in the chat. That's really good. Holly, Richard, I'm going to jump on if that's all right, because I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, and I really do want to get onto this sort of conversation around coaching during COVID. Yeah, because I think we're talking about a very specific reality that we're all in the middle of, or are coming out of the back end of, hopefully. Holly, what have you seen? So let's talk about what we've seen this year gone by before we start talking about what we think might be important for coaches going forward. So what have you noticed in this last year?
Yeah. So in terms of coaching and people, I guess, being open to help and support, we kind of talked about this before, this idea of gratitude guilt. A lot of people think that if they have their health, if they've had a job, perhaps they've also had the added bonus of somebody in their home to hug, that everything's fine and I should just be fine. And what I have seen more and more is, in these coaching conversations, is going, what's really going on? And everybody starts with, I'm fine, I don't want to complain, everything's fine. And then you ask the questions, and people aren't okay, and people want to be able to say it, but they realize, in the larger context of the world, everything that's going on, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's, again, I'm American, so this is heavily on my mind, to the rising, COVID cases worldwide, when we're probably thinking that, we're kind of in the clear here in England, and people are really struggling with to say they need help. And I think we all realize, in the humanness and all of that we are struggling. So I keep finding that when people actually have the time to pause and reflect and actually have those real conversations, and you give them that space to talk, and to explore what's been going on and how they've pushed themselves through COVID, often using their job as their how they get away from reality. So, they're leaning harder into their job, and all of a sudden it's very blurry, and where are the lines? And, they leave their, it used to be that they logged off at night, and now their computer actually sits open all night, so they can just, turn and type if they need to, sort of behavior. So what I'm noticing is that people perhaps are more reluctant to say that they need help, because they feel like, I've had a steady job, I've had my health, have somebody to hug, I should be fine. But getting underneath that, there's a lot of I'm not. And coaching, then to go into, I know we talked about mentoring, but then there's also a part where, when you're a coach, you're like, I'm definitely not a therapist, but being maybe a first sounding board for people, whether they might need coaching or therapy or mentorship, but at least being a first point of call for people. And I think it is more around giving people that reflection time to really where they are in COVID. And I think more people need it than they probably have paused to reflect, to actually acknowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But Richard, what about your experience of coaching during COVID?
Yeah, I think people have had very different experiences. There was this expression going around about a year ago, which is that, we're all in the same boat, when we first moved into, and that fairly quickly became adapted to, we're in the same storm, but very, very different boats, because, people's experience over the the last while is radically different depending on what your setup is, and, how old you are, and, have you got young kids, and, the whole, there's a very different experience. So therefore, I would expect people's experience has been very different. In terms of how that sort of bridges into what comes next, my expectation is that people's experience of a reintegration will also be very different as well. So I think there's something around I guess an awareness of how this transition back could potentially have some surprises for us, perhaps, that we don't expect. I think there can be a little bit of a sort of a tendency to think that we're just going to click our fingers on the 21st of June and we're all kind of we're back. I think there's some merit in sort of regarding it as another period of adjustment, a little bit like the one that we were forced into coming, and it's going to take some time for people to adapt and adjust to future ways.
Yeah, and of course we were, I guess, forced into the lockdown situation in March last year. We're not necessarily being forced in, we're coming out of the back end of it, but there's there isn't a government saying, right, you're all going to go back and sit at your desks now, and companies are able to define that for themselves. And I guess that's going to create a degree of uncertainty, or maybe a degree of discomfort. And I imagine there are a lot of people out there who have started jobs. I mean, Holly, maybe, I don't know what you've done Janus Henderson wise in terms of recruitment during the pandemic, but undoubtedly you'll have had new starters who have never met their team, and they're coming back. So maybe coaching plays a role there.
Yeah, I think that can definitely, if anything, I think the managers need a lot of the coaching, because these are all, unprecedented times. I think we're all probably tired of saying that. So I almost think it's the managers that need the most coaching as well, because like you said, we're all in different boats in the same storm. So it's, how does a manager, that's a huge responsibility, right? So you have all these people in the storm, but then you think about the added, right, people who have never actually stepped foot in an office, never had to make that commute. How do we help them get back into the office? So you're right, coaching has so many different ways that it can play a big part in getting people back into the office. Again, I go back to that psychological safety, making sure people feel okay, whatever that means to them, because we're all going to be okay in different ways. Some people, it might be the commute is the hardest part. Some people, it might be being away from kids. Some people that are introverts may not want to be around people as much as their other colleagues, and they're fine with missing out on the different social aspects of it. But I think giving people that coaching relationship to talk about it, understand their feelings, their values, which we've touched on a few times, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as people come back, I think it's going to be really important to support them in however they need to be supported. I think there's something definitely about making those connections. But Richard, you've both touched on this whole bringing people on board. Someone may have joined 6 months ago, and you may know thinking, well, they're on board, but actually they've only like half joined, if that makes sense. Or they're in the role, but they've never met anybody. Mm-hmm. And actually the more senior they become, the harder this is, because there are more stakeholders to manage. I mean, I remember speaking to a CFO of an asset management firm when he joined, a phenomenally experienced CFO, and he said, I feel, and this is pre-pandemic, but he said, I feel completely all at sea here, because not because I'm not a great accountant or I can't do CFO type jobs, but I don't know how to get a cup of coffee around here. and I don't know where the photocopier is or the printer is, or, you know, they're just some of the really little things that he felt completely all at sea with. And I think that might be the case as people start to come back to the office who have not actually worked in this given office, where they might need some really, it might seem basic, and to your point, Holly, they may feel uncomfortable about asking those questions because they may feel like they're really stupid questions, but actually really important.
And just to kind of, if I may, just sort of bring that down to the bottom line, because it's always good, you know, when working commercially to kind of to look, you know, to work in executive coaching, to look at the commercial impact. I think there are a variety of considerations that are kind of riding on how we how organizations reintegrate their, you know, their people over the coming months, because you know, that in the same way that everybody's had a sort of complex and different experience of the last year or so, people are going to have a different and complex experience coming back in. So therefore, there's something around, as well as the time, there's something around flexibility, so people can kind of adapt and they can kind of find their way back in. My sense is that you know, there can be a tendency for organizations to come out kind of sort of early and firm, and of course you know, the clarity is helpful, and then finding ways for it to be more adaptive as well, because it's going to be a learning process both collectively and individually, where, okay, we've done something, how did it go, what's the review, what's the amendment, what's the, you know, what's the reset, and keep looping through that. I've been wondering, particularly, you know, and it applies to different industries, but if I look at our, if we call it professional financial service work, I've got a suspicion that we might actually have had a productivity and effectiveness boom, where we've actually really been benefiting unwittingly from, rather than the feared for productivity loss of people working from home, a productivity boom. So as we transition back in, I'm curious to see how that plays out. If that, although there are some obvious shortcomings of not being in the office, that actually we suddenly find that we're all commuting much more, and our workloads are heavier than we imagined them to be, because it's that there are some differences in the way we're working. So I think that could be an interesting one. I'm not sure of many organizations who have maybe sort of prepared for that people might be less productive. So I think there's a whole variety, and ultimately I think the way organizations handle this will impact how easily and well they're able to retain and attract employees. Because if people come back and they don't like the way it's landed, then, you know, if you know, it's the classic, if they're desirable and they're looking for something different, they'll leave. And then I think what you could find is that there's a fundamental, because it's complex and because it's unknown, there's a tremendous competitive advantage to be earned by getting this process right, which ultimately is the commercial bottom line of everything that we've spoken about up to this point.
Great, that's great stuff. I'm going to go to a question, and Angela, thank you very much indeed. And Holly, maybe I might put this towards you first of all. Any tips on how you influence someone to take coaching when they think they don't need it? It's like, oi, you need it. But what are your how do you go about doing this?
Well, one, I hope that the conversation that they're having, again, is an open and honest one. One being about, what does it mean to stay where you are versus to change and grow? And understanding that coaching is to help that change and that growth and getting them there, and kind of look at what can be instead of, you know, where they are right now. So I think it's a lot more future focused than, you know, just saying, oh, you know, you're just going to stay here. So I think building that future with them, and what is enticing to them about that future as well, because if they don't want that future, you know, that's going to be very hard to convince them of. So I guess dreaming that future together, and then looking at where they are right now, and actually, you know, making it seem that that's possible.
Yeah, and I wonder also if there's something about there's a danger, isn't there, with someone, particularly if you're thinking that coaching might be a remedial activity because they've got some sort of, I don't know, there's something getting in the way, there's a little block there or whatever it might be, or there's a misunderstanding or a misalignment. It's not, I mean, it would be unfortunate just to kind of convince them to do some coaching and hope the coach tells them. You kind of got to be honest up front and say, look, this is why, and I think the solution might be coaching. And and to your point, they just think they're already the full package, and maybe no one's told them that the honest truth. Richard, what's your take here?
Yeah, some people can be resistant to coaching for a variety of reasons. I guess so. A couple of ways of reframing it. There's a piece in the FT a couple of years ago now where it said, coaching's gone from being remedial. So there's something around, once upon a time it was. Then it became, to your point earlier, Tim, about the bling, it became quite cool. It was a bit of kudos. Whereas now I think it's increasingly becoming just seen as a really practical and pragmatic approach to improving performance. And so it's quite unfussy. It's quite, it's quite straightforward and simple in that regard. So I would sort of employ that approach. I think, it's a little bit like what you say about culture, Tim, is that you've got one whether you want one or not. We've all got areas for improvement, whether we choose to acknowledge we've got them or not. Yeah. So therefore, but by degree, it's almost there's always going to be some gain from working on an aspect of how we're showing up, and we can get evidence of this from 360s, we can get it from appraisal processes, we can get it from psychometrics. There's always areas that it's helpful for us to be more aware of. We may be able to do something about it, we may not, but at least if we're aware, we can behave differently. The feedback loop has changed in a fashion. And we do know from, I'm just looking at this, they think they're already the full package. There's a couple of things around that. We know from Hogan's that, people who are very, very robust in their sense, and they're not open to feedback. There's a particular type of person, the scale is called adjustment. When someone with a very high adjustment is particularly difficult to coach because, they just tend to deflect anything that kind of sort of contravenes the sort of got this rhino hide type way of engaging with the world. And then for other people, it's almost is slightly more brittle shell. It's a protective mechanism because it's almost like an overcompensation for some fragility of self and self-esteem. So it could be either end of those spectrums, but both of those, they can be quite difficult conversations to have. However, once, and this kind of feeds in with what Holly was saying, once there's trust in the confidentiality of the relationship, then it can really enable a shift of, I guess, acceptance of ourselves and an understanding of how we can function in the world of work. So lots to be gained there as well.
That's great. That's really good. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm conscious of time, and we just have literally just sort of hit the buffers there at 1:45, and I think that's a really nice place to wrap up there, is that comment about trust, because once trust exists, then amazing stuff flows. Sometimes you've got to get to that point, and that point doesn't just happen automatically. But once there's that strength of relationship between the coach and the individual being coached, then great stuff can flow. Which also suggests that at the beginning of the process, building that trust right at the very start is really important. So look, here's a comment from Paul, in case there's any, but no problem at all. I don't think there's a question there, but thank you very much for that, Paul, and it'd be great to pick up on that separately. But look, I wanted to just give a big thank you very much indeed to Holly for taking the time to come and join us and to share some of your thoughts and ideas, and to Richard likewise for sharing his thoughts and ideas.